What if the general who saved the American Revolution never won a single major battle? Not one. He lost at Guilford Courthouse. He lost at Hobkirk's Hill. He lost at Eutaw Springs. By every conventional measure of warfare, Nathanael Greene lost the Southern campaign. And yet, when it was over, the British had lost the South, because Greene understood something that Cornwallis never did. You don't have to win battles to win a war. You just have to make winning cost more than the enemy can afford to pay. This story is not about battles. It is about two completely different ideas of what winning actually means. Nathanael Greene believed that an army that survives is more dangerous than an army that wins. That every engagement, however costly, that kept his force intact and mobile was a victory, regardless of who held the field at the end of the day. That the purpose of fighting was not to defeat Cornwallis in any single engagement, but to drain him of men, of supplies, of time, of the confidence that had carried him into the South, believing the rebellion there was already finished. Charles Cornwallis believed in the logic of every European commander of his generation. Find the enemy's main force, bring it to battle, destroy it, control the territory, win the war. It was the logic that had produced the greatest military victories of the 18th century. It was the logic that had worked at Camden. It was the logic that was going to destroy him. The thesis of this story is simple and extraordinary. Greene defeated Cornwallis not by beating him, but by exhausting him. He turned the South into a trap that Cornwallis could never escape, not because Greene was stronger, but because Greene understood that Cornwallis's greatest strength, his relentless aggression, was also the thing that would eventually break him. This is the story of the most strategically sophisticated campaign in the American Revolution, and the general who ran it never won a major battle. Subscribe right now if you are not already here, because this is the story most history books skip entirely, the campaign that made Yorktown possible, and the commander who deserves far more credit than history has given him. Nathanael Greene was born in 1742 in Potawatomi, Rhode Island, into a Quaker family that believed war was a sin and books were a luxury. His father thought both beliefs practical. He kept his son out of school, put him to work in the family ironworks, and discouraged the reading habit that young Nathanael developed with the same quiet stubbornness that would define his entire military career. Greene taught himself anyway. He traded iron nails for books with merchants who passed through Coventry. He read military history, mathematics, law, philosophy. He corresponded with scholars in Providence and Boston. He built a library that became one of the finest private collections in Rhode Island, a collection that a Quaker ironmonger's son had assembled entirely through the force of wanting to know more than his circumstances said he should. He was also, by the time he reached adulthood, walking with a pronounced limp from a stiff knee that had troubled him since childhood. He was not the physical image of a soldier. He was stocky, bookish, self-educated, and entirely unsuited to the aristocratic bearing that the 18th century expected of military officers. None of it mattered. When the Revolution began in 1775, Greene resigned from the Quakers, who expelled him for it, and raised a militia company in Rhode Island. Within months, Washington had noticed him. Within a year, he was one of Washington's most trusted generals. Within 2 years, he was running the logistics of the entire Continental Army as Quartermaster General, a job nobody wanted, in a bureaucratic wilderness that would have broken most men, which Greene handled with the same methodical intelligence he had applied to reading books in a Rhode Island ironworks. He hated the job. He begged Washington repeatedly for a field command. Washington kept him where the army needed him most, until the South collapsed. Before we go further, we need to spend real time with Charles Cornwallis. Because the script that reduces Cornwallis to a symbol, the arrogant British general who got what he deserved, misses everything important about why Greene's campaign was as difficult and as brilliant as it was. Cornwallis was 52 years old in 1780, a veteran of campaigns across Europe and America, a genuine military talent whose record before the Southern campaign was impressive enough to justify his confidence. He had fought at Long Island. He had pursued Washington across New Jersey in the autumn of 1776 with a speed and aggression that nearly ended the Revolution before Trenton. He had taken Philadelphia. He had won at Camden in August of 1780 with a tactical brilliance that his peers admired openly. He was not a fool. He was not a martinet. He was a commander who had spent his entire career learning one lesson very well: that aggressive pursuit of a beaten enemy was how wars were won, and who had never been in a situation where that lesson was the wrong one to apply. His private wound was his marriage. His wife Jemima had died in 1779, just before he sailed for the Southern campaign, and people who knew Cornwallis well said he was never quite the same afterward. He threw himself into the campaign with a ferocity that some of his officers found unsettling, as if the campaign was something to be consumed by rather than conducted. He pushed his army harder than the logistics could sustain. He took risks that a more measured commander would have calculated differently. He wanted to end the rebellion in the South quickly and completely. That want, that urgency, was the crack Greene was going to drive a wedge into. What Cornwallis never fully understood was that he was fighting a different kind of war than the one he had trained for. In Europe, armies fought to control territory and to destroy each other's capacity to fight. Decisive engagement was the goal. A general who refused to offer decisive engagement was considered a coward or a fool. Greene was neither. He was something the British had no framework for. He was a commander who had decided that preserving his army's existence was more important than winning any single battle, and who had the intellectual discipline to hold that decision even when every instinct of military pride said to stand and fight. That discipline is the hardest thing in warfare, and it is what separated Greene from every other American commander the British faced in the South. Greene arrived in Charlotte, North Carolina in December of 1780 to take command of the Southern Continental Army. What he found was barely an army. Roughly 1,400 men, most of them starving, many of them without shoes or adequate clothing, spread across the Carolina backcountry in a condition that bordered on dissolution. The previous commander, Horatio Gates, had led 3,000 of them to destruction at Camden in August, routed in under an hour, Gates himself reportedly not stopping his retreat for 60 miles. The infrastructure of the campaign had collapsed along with Gates's army. Supply lines did not exist. Pay was months in arrears. Morale was the kind that comes from watching everything go wrong and having no reason to believe anything will improve. Greene looked at all of this and made the first of the decisions that marked him as extraordinary. He did not try to rebuild the army into something capable of facing Cornwallis in open battle before using it. He understood that trying to create a conventional force from these materials would take too long and might never work at all. Instead, he made the decision that every military textbook of his era said was suicidal. He split his already tiny force. He sent roughly 600 troops west under Daniel Morgan, with orders to operate in the interior of South Carolina, threatening British outposts and tying down Cornwallis's mobile forces. He kept the remaining force with himself in North Carolina, positioning it to threaten the British from the east, while Morgan threatened from the west. Two forces too small to fight Cornwallis on their own terms, too spread out to support each other quickly. Positioned in a way that any conventional military calculation said was an invitation to be destroyed, one piece at a time. It was not recklessness. It was the opposite. Greene understood that Cornwallis could not ignore two threats simultaneously without dividing his own force. And Cornwallis divided to respond to the larger threat, Morgan, by sending Tarleton after him. What happened to Tarleton at Cowpens in January of 1781 has its own full story. Morgan annihilated him in 60 minutes with the most perfectly designed battlefield trap of the Revolution. The result was that Cornwallis lost his best mobile commander, nearly 1,000 of his best soldiers, and the tactical flexibility that had given him his advantage across the entire southern campaign. But here is the thing that matters most about Cowpens, in the context of Greene's campaign. Cowpens was not Greene's plan. It was Morgan's genius. What was Greene's genius was the strategic structure that made Cowpens possible. The decision to split the force, to threaten from two directions, to force Cornwallis to respond to a situation his own logic demanded he respond to, in the worst possible way. Greene set the conditions. Morgan sprung the trap, and Cornwallis, furious at the loss of Tarleton's force, made the decision that would doom the entire British position in the south. He decided to chase Greene. After Cowpens, Cornwallis burned his own supply wagons, his food, his tents, his medical supplies, his extra ammunition, everything that an army needs to sustain itself in the field. He destroyed it deliberately so his force could move faster, faster than Greene could run, fast enough to catch the American army and destroy it before it could escape into Virginia. The pursuit became known as the Race to the Dan, a desperate running chase across the Carolina Piedmont toward the Dan River on the Virginia border, the last natural barrier between Cornwallis and Greene's destruction. Greene moved with extraordinary speed and extraordinary discipline. He kept his army just far enough ahead of the British to avoid engagement, just slow enough to keep Cornwallis moving and burning through resources he could not replace. He organized the crossing of every river he came to, collecting boats from miles in either direction, leaving nothing for the British to use, crossing his force, and then destroying or removing everything that could carry a British soldier across behind him. His rear guard, under Colonel Otho Williams, performed one of the most skillful delaying actions in the history of American warfare, keeping just enough distance between the pursuing British vanguard and the main American column to prevent the engagement Cornwallis desperately needed, while never falling so far behind that the British could bypass them and strike Greene directly. Cornwallis's army covered 230 miles in 25 days, through freezing February rain and mud. They outran their supply lines. They ate whatever they could find, which was not much in a countryside that had been stripped by months of partisan fighting. Men went hungry. Horses collapsed. Equipment that broke down had to be abandoned because there were no replacements. And then Greene crossed the Dan River into Virginia with his entire force intact. Cornwallis stood on the southern bank of the Dan and looked at a river he could not cross. Greene had taken every boat and understood that the pursuit had failed. He retreated to Hillsborough, North Carolina, raised the royal standard, and issued a proclamation calling on loyalists to rally to the crown. Almost nobody came. Stop here for a moment. Cornwallis burned his supply wagons. He marched his army 230 miles through a Carolina winter. He exhausted his men and his horses. He outran his logistics. He strained his supply lines past their breaking point. And he ended up standing at a river with no boats, watching the army he had chased disappear into Virginia. He had gained nothing, lost everything he burned, and the loyalist population he had counted on to sustain his campaign was looking at what had just happened and making very quiet calculations about which side it was actually safe to support. Subscribe if you are not already here, because what Greene does next, the moment he crosses back into North Carolina and starts fighting, is the part of this story that nobody ever explains properly, and it changes everything. Greene recrossed the Dan in mid-February 1781, back into North Carolina, with his army rested, resupplied, and reinforced by Virginia militia. He was not coming back to run. He was coming back to fight, but to fight in a way that looked, to anyone watching, like a defeat and functioned, in the larger strategic picture, as a victory. The battle came at Guilford Courthouse on March 15, 1781. Greene designed his defensive position using the same three-line formation that Morgan had used at Cowpens, because Greene had absorbed the lesson of Cowpens immediately and understood that the militia's contribution was not to hold, but to delay and inflict casualties before retiring to the rear. The first line was North Carolina militia, positioned at the edge of a wood. Their orders were not to hold. Their orders were to fire 2 volleys, aimed at the officers, aimed at the men with the silver buttons, and then fall back through the second line. The second line was Virginia militia, tougher and more experienced, positioned 300 yards further back. Their orders were to hold longer, inflict more casualties, and then also retire. The third line was the Continental Regulars, Maryland and Virginia veterans, trained soldiers who had been fighting for years, positioned on the high ground behind the courthouse. Cornwallis attacked. The first line fired 2 volleys and ran. The second line held longer and then broke. The British pushed forward, advancing through woods and broken ground, losing officers, losing men, their formations loosening as they pursued. And then they hit the Continental line. What followed was the most vicious close-quarters fighting of the entire Southern campaign. The Continentals did not break. They counterattacked. They drove the British back across the ground they had just crossed. The fighting was hand-to-hand in some places, bayonets and musket butts, men grappling in the woods at distances where tactics were irrelevant and survival was the only calculation. Cornwallis made a decision in the middle of this fighting that tells you everything about the man and the pressure he was under. He ordered his artillery to fire grape shot, a devastating anti-personnel load that scattered dozens of iron balls across a wide area at close range, directly into the melee, into British and American soldiers fighting at close quarters, into his own men as well as the enemy. It worked. The Continentals fell back. The British held the field. Cornwallis had won the Battle of Guilford Courthouse. He had suffered over 500 casualties, nearly a third of his total effective strength. Officers fell at a rate that stripped his units of experienced leadership. He had no medical supplies left to care for the wounded. He had no food stockpiled to feed the survivors. He had won the ground and lost the capacity to use it. A member of the British Parliament, Charles James Fox, heard the casualty figures and said, "Another such victory would ruin the British Army." Greene retreated from Guilford Courthouse in good order, his army intact, his strategic position unchanged. He wrote to a friend that night with characteristic precision, "We fight, get beat, rise, and fight again." After Guilford Courthouse, Cornwallis made the decision that ended the war. He marched to the coast. He wrote to his superiors that the Carolinas could not be held without Virginia being first subdued. He left the interior of the Carolinas to subordinate commanders and moved his army to Wilmington, then north into Virginia, eventually establishing his base at Yorktown. He was done with Greene. And Greene, the general who had been losing, now had the South to himself. What followed over the next 5 months was the systematic dismantling of the British outpost network that Cornwallis had constructed across South Carolina and Georgia, fort after fort, garrison after garrison. Greene could not take the heavily fortified positions by assault, so he besieged them. He won some, he lost some. He took Hobkirk's Hill and lost it. He besieged 96 for a month and failed to take it before a British relief column arrived. He lost those battles too. But the British garrison commanders, without Cornwallis's mobile force to support and resupply them, found themselves isolated. Each engagement cost them men they could not replace. Each siege forced them to consume supplies faster than they could be replenished. Each month that passed without Cornwallis's return made their position less sustainable. One by one, the British outposts evacuated, not because Greene had captured them, because holding them had become untenable. By the autumn of 1781, the British presence in the South had contracted to a handful of coastal towns, Charleston, Savannah, that could be supplied by sea. The vast interior of South Carolina and Georgia, which Cornwallis had controlled with his outpost network just a year earlier, was gone. Greene had not won a major battle. He had made the cost of every British position in the South higher than the British could sustain. And Cornwallis, pursuing the logic that had always worked before, find the enemy's main force, bring it to battle, destroy it, had burned his wagons, exhausted his army, and marched himself into a peninsula in Virginia, where Washington and Rochambeau were about to seal every exit. The trap at Yorktown was not Greene's trap, it was Washington's trap, and Rochambeau's trap, and de Grasse's trap. But the trap would not have been possible if Cornwallis had not been drawn north by the failures in the South. And the failures in the South would not have happened if Greene had not spent 8 months making every British success too expensive to sustain. Greene did not win Yorktown. He made Yorktown necessary. The principle at the heart of Greene's campaign is not a military principle. It is an economic one. Every army has a cost. Soldiers must be paid, or at least fed. Equipment wears out and must be replaced. Officers who fall in battle must be replaced by men who are less experienced. Supply lines must be maintained, or the army consumes itself. Every engagement, even a victory, depletes the force that wins it. The question is not who wins the engagement. The question is who can sustain the cost of winning. Britain could sustain a great deal. It had the largest treasury and the most powerful navy in the world. It could ship soldiers, supplies, and equipment across the Atlantic in quantities that the Continental Congress could only dream of matching. What it could not sustain was a war whose costs kept rising without a corresponding reduction in the enemy's capacity to fight. Greene understood this. He understood that Cornwallis's aggressiveness, the quality that made him dangerous in a conventional war, was also the quality that drove his army's cost upward at a rate that could not be sustained in a campaign without clear strategic objectives. Every time Cornwallis attacked and won, he spent men he could not replace in a theater that London was beginning to question. Every time he marched 200 miles through a Carolina winter to catch an army he could not catch, he consumed supplies that could not be replenished. Every time he burned a supply wagon to move faster, he reduced his army's capacity to sustain itself in the field. Cornwallis wanted a decisive battle. Greene refused to give him one, except on terms so costly that the winning of it accelerated the British defeat. Guilford Courthouse was the perfect expression of this principle. Greene designed a battle he expected to lose in a way that would cost Cornwallis more than winning was worth. That is not the conventional definition of military genius. It is a better one. Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown on October 19, 1781. He claimed illness and sent a subordinate to hand over his sword. The war was effectively over. His reputation, while damaged, survived, partly because the British establishment needed someone other than Cornwallis to blame, and Lord Germain was a more convenient target. He went on to serve as Governor-General of India and then Lord Lieutenant of Ireland, careers of genuine accomplishment that partially rehabilitated the reputation Yorktown had cost him. He died in India in 1805, still serving, still aggressive, still the kind of man who moved forward rather than turned back. He never fully understood what Greene had done to him. His memoirs and correspondence suggest a man who believed he had been let down by strategic decisions made in London, by Germain's confused orders, by Clinton's failure to adequately support him, by the impossible logistics of fighting a war 3,000 miles from home. He was not entirely wrong about any of those things, but he was never willing to engage with the possibility that a Quaker ironmonger's son from Rhode Island had outsmarted him. Greene survived the war, but not by much. He returned to private life in 1783, physically broken by the campaign, rheumatism, recurring fevers, the accumulated damage of years of campaigning in the Carolina heat and cold. He had been given a plantation in Georgia by a grateful South Carolina legislature and moved there with his family, trying to recover his health and manage an estate he had no money to sustain. He died of heat stroke in June of 1786. He was 43 years old. He had been a general for 5 years. He had transformed the Southern campaign from a catastrophe into the conditions that made Yorktown possible. He had done it without winning a major battle. He had done it by understanding something about warfare that most of his contemporaries, on both sides, never grasped. And he died at 43, broke, on a Georgia plantation, with almost none of the recognition that lesser contributions to the Revolution had already produced for men who were better at politics than at war. Washington wrote that Greene was a great general. It was an understatement. The question this story keeps raising is deceptively simple. What does it mean to win? Cornwallis won more battles than Greene in the Southern campaign. He held more ground. He inflicted more casualties in individual engagements. By every conventional measure of 18th century military success, he was the better tactician on the day. And he lost the war in the South. Greene lost more battles, retreated more often, gave up more ground, offered the kind of performance that, in a European theater, would have ended a general's career before it produced results. And he saved the Revolution. The gap between those two facts is where the real lesson lives, not just for military history. For anyone who has ever been told that losing means failing, that giving ground means giving up, that the only way to prove you are not beaten is to stand and fight on terms that guarantee you will be. Greene refused those terms, every time, until refusing them had cost Cornwallis everything. Drop a comment below. Could Cornwallis have won the Southern campaign if he had simply refused to chase Greene? If he had held his positions, consolidated his outpost network, and waited for Greene to come to him on British terms, does the outcome change? And could Greene's strategy have worked against a different kind of opponent, one who was patient enough not to burn his own supply wagons? There is no clean answer. The debate has been running since 1781. If this story changed how you think about what winning actually means, share it. Not for the channel, for the idea. Subscribe if you are not already here, because next time we are covering another commander who understood that the most dangerous strategy is not the most aggressive one, and what it cost the people who underestimated him. The road is just where this one happened.